Europeans are preparing for war. We know this. Every politician with whom you talk in Europe basically expects Russia to invade. But they know that as long as Russia is fighting in Ukraine, as long as the Ukrainian army is holding the front, Russia is not able to proceed with invasion. They announced major military exercises for September of 25 in Belarus some time ago. They planned to send approximately 100,000 Russian troops into Belarus for so-called exercises. And we know that this kind of exercises in 22 ended with invasion of Ukraine. So it was clear that September 25 was a month when Russia was planning to invade Eastern Europe, or at least consider it to invade Eastern Europe.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to YouTube channel War and Politics. My name is Sofia Troshchuk, and it's my pleasure to introduce our guest. It's Dr. Yuri Felshtinsky, Russian-American historian. Dr. Felshtinsky, thank you for joining us. Hello, and nice to see you.
Thank you very much for your invitation.
So, Russia confirmed the launch of an Oreshnik ballistic missile at Lviv on the night of January 9th. At the same time, the Russian Federation recalled the fake news about the so-called attack on the residence of Russian dictator Vladimir Putin and state that this was some kind of revenge. How do you assess this whole situation in general?
Well, generally speaking, and we have to understand that we cross the date when this war is now the longest war in Russian history, and it's actually even longer than the Great Patriotic War on the Soviet Union against Nazi Germany. Understanding this, we have to agree that Russia, which invaded Ukraine actually in 2014, but even if we start from 22, is not able to take Ukraine. I mean, this is an obvious conclusion which we have to make. Russia occupied some territories of Ukraine, including Crimea, which was occupied in 2014, but it's not able to win this war. And it's not able militarily to take Ukraine. The only possibility which is left to try to damage Ukraine from the air as much as possible and force Ukraine to capitulate using both airstrikes from Ukrainian cities and Ukrainian population, and pressure which is applied with the assistance of President Trump, to force Ukraine to surrender. So there is a difference between ability to conquer territory of the country and force a state to capitulate. And since Russia is not able to win militarily, they are trying to force Ukraine to surrender. That's why they're damaging Ukraine every day with those strikes from the major cities, major Ukrainian cities. And that's what's happening. And I expect this to continue. And the major problem is that the rule of the game is that Ukrainians are not striking against major Russian cities, and actually Russian Federation is a country of just one city, Moscow. So Ukrainians are not striking against Moscow, while Moscow, as we see, regularly strikes against Kiev, for example, and other major cities of Ukraine. So unless this changes, unless Ukrainians will start to strike against Moscow, this war will continue forever, literally, because Putin has no reasons to stop this war or to start to negotiate, because Moscow is not touched by this war, and everything in Russia is concentrated in Moscow.
Lviv is also located close to the borders with European countries, and many experts say that this is a kind of message from Putin to Europe to demonstrate his terrifying capabilities. Do you agree with this opinion?
Well, I do not think that this was the objective, to strike closer to European borders. Although it's clear, of course, that Europe is much more nervous when this, missiles or Oreshnik hits near the borders. This is obvious. But we know that from time to time, some Russian drones intentionally or just by chance crossing the border, we see the destruction of the work of European airports because of Russian drones. Russian submarines moving closer and closer to Western Navy bases. So it's not that Russia is afraid of this kind of confrontation. Indeed, rhetorically, we heard that President Putin, what is a big deal? Because prior to this was former President Dmitry Medvedev, for example, basically was explaining to Europe that, they're about to start the war, European war. So it's bluff is the major tool of the Russian government. A nuclear bluff is a major tool of the Russian government. And they're not really afraid to strike cities or places near the Western, near the East European borders, near foreign borders. We should expect to see this in the future, but it's probably not intentional, just their desire to indicate that in Ukraine there is no safe place, that it's not going to be just Kiev, it's also going to be Lvov, which is very close to the foreign East European border of Ukraine. Sooner or later, of course, we might expect some accidents when drones or missiles hitting European territories as well. But I do not think that Putin is concerned with this.
Kremlin allies and oligarchs could be putting pressure on Russian dictator Vladimir Putin to bring him to the negotiation table, writes Eminite in an article for the Wall Street Journal. Is this really possible for Putin? What else could be pressuring him?
Well, Eminite is a great expert, and so there are, different views about the role of oligarchs. I would not use the word oligarchs actually, because oligarchs existed prior to 2000. After 2000, we are talking about rich Russians who might have some influence when it's related to economic issues, but not to political ones. And I do not think that anyone is actually able to influence Putin, including people like Abramovich, who is his partner in oil business and other businesses. But I think the point is that Russian, let's leave the word oligarch. Russian oligarchs are actually doing great under the war conditions. The amount of Russian billionaires and millionaires since 2022 increased dramatically. And Russian businesses are doing great. They are receiving state orders. And this is was very good for them. And but there is a catch, and again, the catch is that all of them, except those who live abroad, of course, like Abramovich, all of them live in Moscow. And when you talk to people who live in Moscow, to regular people, they usually would explain to you that they do not feel war, that there is no war. For them, this is a war which is basically, happening in a foreign state, Ukraine. It's far away, and Moscow doesn't feel it at all. Putin, by the way, is not drafting people from Moscow for the same reason. He understands that Moscow is the only important point in Russia, so he doesn't want Moscow to feel the war. So unless Moscow feels the war, and this is not just 10% of population of the Russian Federation, what is a great deal, by the way, this is those 10% which actually rule the countries, the entire country. So the rest of the country is not important. When Ukrainians invaded Kursk region, everybody thought that this is going to be a major deal for the Russian government. But indeed, they did not move troops from Ukrainian front, for example, to defend Kursk region at all. They do not care about Kursk. They do not care about their territory. They care about destruction of the territory of the enemy. And the enemy now is Ukraine, of course. So once again, unless those oligarchs feel the war, they are not going to apply any pressure, even if they have the ability to do this, what is questionable. But besides oligarchs, there are people from the FSB who actually installed Putin in 2000, who are behind him. All these 25 years, they support him 100% because he created a situation when the FSB, as the institution, the state security, controls the entire Russian Federation. And this is a great victory for this institution. It's a big deal. They are ruling Russia without any political control. In the Soviet Union, the KGB was existing under political control of the Communist Party. They are ruling Russia having the entire economic machine of the Russian Federation in their disposal, not just a budget which they would receive from the government in any normal country, or the budget which KGB would receive from the government during the Soviet years. So the situation is perfect for them, but this is perfect because all of them, again, are concentrated in Moscow, and all their life is actually in Moscow. And Moscow is not touched by the war. And by the way, for all these years, and the war, if we count from 22, it's almost 4 years. All these years, there was a special agreement between the United States and Europe. This was before Trump, of course, and Ukrainians, that they're not using Western weapons in strikes against Russian Federation. Now, this changed. The Ukrainians had the right to use these Western weapons in strikes against their own occupied territory, like Crimea. But they would get Western assistance and Western weapons under conditions that they are not going to strike against the territory of the Russian Federation. And this continued until literally last weeks of Biden in office. It's only after he lost elections and just before he was leaving his office, he finally allowed Ukrainians to use Western weapons for strikes against territory of the Russian Federation, except Moscow. My point is that everybody understands that as soon as Ukrainians are starting to strike against Moscow, Russia would lose this war. I mean, this is inevitable. If we want to end this war, if we want to force the Russian government to start negotiations, Ukrainians have to strike against Moscow. Otherwise, this war will continue forever.
You know, some people say that it could be some escalation when Ukraine will bomb Moscow.
Well, I think, again, war by definition is escalation. I mean, how much more escalation we could see? Russians are bombing Ukraine every day, including Kiev. The idea is to damage, to destroy, literally, to destroy the entire country. If we see territories which Russians take at the end or Ukrainians liberate at the end, it's usually a desert. There is not a single building left untouched by war. That's how Russia, very slowly, of course, is taking Ukrainian territories since 22. So this is their ideal version of this war. And, if we do nothing, if we just allow Russia to continue to wage this permanent war, then the entire Ukraine, after some years, will be destroyed, like completely. And again, it's not that Russia would win this war. No, there is no winning possibility for Russia, but the country will be destroyed. Buildings will be destroyed. People will be killed. And so if we want to end this war, if we want to force Russia to negotiate, and it seems to be that everybody wants to, except Russia, of course, everybody wants to end this war and everybody wants to force the Russian government to start negotiations, the only way is to strike against Moscow. There is just no other way. And that's why in every peace agreement which Trump proposes to the Ukrainian government, and once again, these are not peace agreements. These are different versions of the same surrender, which is which Putin is offering Ukraine since June of 24, and which is now first sent to Trump and translated into English, and then submitted to the Ukrainian government and to Europe for discussion and for approval. But once again, if we want to force the Russian government to start negotiations, and again, I do not know how these negotiations would continue, what might be the result of it, but if we want the Russian government to sit at the negotiation table, we have to strike against Moscow. There is no other way.
US President Donald Trump is confident that he saved NATO and that without him, the North Atlantic Alliance would no longer exist. A two-part question. Do you agree with this statement, and how do you currently assess the true strength of NATO?
Well, I will say that at this point, NATO doesn't exist. I think it's clear to everybody. It's clear to Ukrainians. It's clear to Europeans what is more important. I do not think there is a single politician or military leader in Europe who seriously believes that if Russia invades Eastern Europe, United States would start to defend Europe against Russia. This is not going to happen. We know this. And it started with the first Trump speech in Mayflower Hotel in 2016, when he stated that NATO is an obsolete organization. We see that the United States slowly withdrawing from all, from all events conducted by NATO. So NATO doesn't exist anymore, especially when Trump is planning to conduct military operations against Greenland, which is part of NATO. So there is no NATO. Trump, unfortunately for all of us, is Putin's partner in this war. And there are several reasons for this. One is that Trump's major opponent on philosophical level is world's democracy. Now, world's democracy exists in several, major states of the world, right? In the United States, it's half of the United States, literally, a democratic part of the United States. In America, it's Canada. In Europe, of course, this is basically the entire European Union. And the same enemy exists for Putin, the major opponent of Putin's structure, which Putin proposes for the entire world, is the world's democracy. And that's why we see and hear all this rhetoric against Western democratic states. But Putin is not able to proceed into Europe, to attack Europe, unless the Ukrainian campaign is over. And Trump understands this very well. So in order to help Putin to invade Eastern Europe, and I'm very serious about this. It's not that I'm trying to be too critical of Putin. This is too critical of Trump. This is really what's happening. That Trump is provoking Putin to invade Europe, but in order for Putin to invade Europe, he first has to end his campaign in Ukraine and force Ukrainian army to be dissolved. And that's why Trump is helping Putin to take Ukraine, because he knows that unless Ukrainian army is not holding the Russian invasion, he is not able to proceed into Europe. That's what's happening. That's why we see, attempts of Trump to suppress democratic movement in the United States. That's why we see Trump implementing tariffs against Canada, which indeed what he's doing, these are not tariffs, these are sanctions. That's why we see all this rhetoric, Trump's rhetoric against Greenland and his attempts and statements that Greenland should be part of the United States, because he and Putin, he again are partners. Just Trump was Greenland and Putin wants at least Eastern Europe. This is going to continue for 3 more years. Let's hope that Trump will not stay longer as the president, although I believe that he will attempt to stay longer. It's questionable whether he would be able to do this, but he will try to. The optimistic scenario is that he is the president for 3 years only, and Putin knows that he has only 3 years to finish with Ukraine and to invade Europe. And Trump knows that he has only 3 years with helping Putin to take Ukraine and to invade Europe, through only 3 years to take Greenland. Maybe he's still dreaming about taking Canada and making 51st state out from Canada. But again, these 3 years are going to be very, very complicated, but we should not hope that at one day Trump would wake up and will change his policy towards Russia, towards Ukraine, towards Europe. I do not think this would happen.
Also, US President Donald Trump said that Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has no cards, but only one, Donald Trump. Speaking Trump's language, what cards does Ukraine have now?
Well, I think what Trump is saying, and even what Trump is doing, is a kind of irrelevant. And the same, by the way, is true about Putin. Since 21st of January of 25, they were trying to force Ukraine and Europe to capitulate. And this didn't happen. I mean, in the end, after all this rhetoric, after all threats, after all different conversations, meetings after meetings, drafts of these so-called peaceful plans, nothing happened, really. The war is continuing the way it was. I mean, there is no difference between the war of January 25 and of January 26. Russia is probably using more air power to destroy Ukraine from the air, but this is the only difference. And Trump is not able to force Ukraine to capitulate, and Trump is not able to force Europe to surrender to both Trump and Putin. So this is not happening. We have to understand this. The only guarantee which Ukraine has by now is Ukrainian army. I think this is clear. It was publicly confirmed by German Chancellor Merz in his meeting in Washington, D.C. with Trump, Zelensky, and other European leaders, when he basically says that the only guarantee which Ukraine has and might have is the Ukrainian army. And I think this is obvious. This is understood by everybody, both in Ukraine and in Europe. And that's why in every so-called peace plan, which Trump receives from Moscow and then submits to Zelensky, there is a provision that Ukrainian army should be partially or completely demobilized. By the way, not a single draft of this plans included the provisions that the Russian army should be demobilized. Although if there is peace, you do not really need the Russian army to be kept and saved and to exist in the form in which it exists now. It's because Putin, of course, plans to use this army as soon as possible to invade Europe. So it's clear to everybody that the only guarantee which Ukraine has is the Ukrainian army. But I would say more. The Ukrainian army at this point not only defending Ukraine against extension of the Russian invasion or continuation of the Russian invasion, it also defends Europe against Russian invasion. In other words, as long as Ukrainian army exists, Putin is not able to invade Eastern Europe. And that's why both Trump and Putin are trying to force Ukrainians to agree with the provisions that the Ukrainian army would be demobilized. So that's what I think is happening again. Trump has no cards at all. Literally, he lost all these cards. He lost them in that historical day, which we remember very well, when President Zelensky went to the Oval Office and had that, heated conversation with both Trump and Vice President Vance. But this was the day when the game of Trump and the game of Putin forcing Ukraine to capitulate was actually over. It still continues. Everybody is pretending, and anti-stress pretending that there is a process, there is a peaceful process which is going on, that there is still something to discuss. Indeed, there is nothing to discuss. I mean, literally nothing to discuss. And both Kushner and Witkoff might go to Moscow, every other day. This would not change anything because the main players of these negotiations are Ukraine and Europe, and they basically do not agree to surrender because they know that if they would agree to surrender, this simply would be death for both Ukraine and Europe as we know it, or Europe as it exists today. So Europeans are preparing for war. We know this. Every politician with whom you talk in Europe basically expects Russia to invade. But they know that as long as Russia is fighting in Ukraine, as long as the Ukrainian army is holding the front, Russia is not able to proceed with invasion. They announced major military exercises for September of 25 in Belarus some time ago. They planned to send approximately 100,000 Russian troops into Belarus for so-called exercises. And we know that this kind of exercises in 22 ended with invasion of Ukraine. So it was clear that September 25 was a month when Russia was planning to invade Eastern Europe, or at least consider it to invade Eastern Europe. But in the end, instead of sending 100,000 troops, Russian troops to Belarus, they sent only 3,000 troops. In other words, Russia has no ground forces, to invade Europe, and this is happening because these ground forces are engaged in a war against Ukraine. So I think the battle, in some extent, the battle is over. Trump is not able to force Ukraine to surrender. Trump is not able to force Europe to surrender. Putin is not able to force Ukraine to surrender. But again, unfortunately, in a format which this war is happening now, Russia is able to conduct it for a limited period of time. Again, we're probably talking about 3-year period, because then Trump supposedly will leave the office, but this 3 years might be very different. And the problem is, of course, that Europeans are trying to be polite, trying to be diplomatic, trying to live under the impression that there is a possibility that the United States will start to support democracy in the world again. And even when Europe is in reality is planning to defend Greenland against the invasion of the United States, and this is what is happening now, right? Trump is saying that he's going to invade, and Europeans are saying that they are sending troops to Greenland, to defend Greenland against China in Russia. But indeed, of course, they're sending those troops to defend Greenland against the United States. Or let's say they're sending those troops there with the hope that Americans would not try to take Greenland if European troops are present in Greenland. It might work, of course, but in reality, again, we know that those troops are sent to Greenland, to defend Greenland against American invasion. If this happens, if American invasion will become the reality, not only this will be the end of NATO, even the official end of NATO, because NATO as NATO would have to fight against the invasion of a foreign country, which in this case would be the United States, which is also a member of NATO. But it's also might be the end of European Union, unfortunately, because this probably would lead to a major diplomatic and political conflict between Europe and the United States. And it's very possible that some countries of European Union, like Hungary, like the Czech Republic, like Slovakia, maybe even Poland, would refuse to participate in this operation to defend Greenland against the United States. And this might, at the end, lead to the collapse of European Union as well. That's what Putin wants, we have to stress. That's what Trump wants, we have to stress, because he actually wants both of them, Putin and Trump. They would like to deal with Europe, which is not united, because it's much more difficult for them to deal with Europe, which is united. But that's what might be happening if Trump continues his attempts to take Greenland.
So the only positive point is that we still have Ukrainian defense forces to fight against.
Right. This is the only positive. This is the only positive thing but I have to say that this is a major one. And in reality, it's more positive than it sounds. The point is that Russia is not able to take Ukraine. And if Russia is not able to take Ukraine, Russia is not able to proceed into Europe. And Europe is becoming stronger every day. So the time actually for Trump and for Putin, the time is kind of running very quickly. Again, they have 3 years. It's not too much. And Europe is becoming stronger every day. And both Trump and Putin do not have cards. I mean, if we are talking about cards who politicians have, then of course Trump and Putin do not have them at all. All those cards were used in 25. Now, 26 may not be different. It might, continue the way it was in 25, unless, as I said, Ukrainians and Europeans, and this is, of course, this has to be a political decision first, unless Ukrainians and Europeans change the format of this war and strike against Moscow. A couple days ago, just by chance, I've seen a map of Europe, which was it was a different kind of map of Europe. It's indicated where people live in Europe. And those territories where people were living, in quantities, were marked by a particular color, let's say black. So the entire Europe, of course, was black. And in the Russian Federation, the only territory which was black was Moscow. And this is the point. There is no country which exists under the name Russian Federation. There is no such country. The country which exists in reality is Moscow. So it's the state of Moscow. It's not state of Russian Federation. There is no Russia. There is Moscow only. So if we want to stop this war, if we want to end this war, we have to strike against Moscow. There is no other way.
Dr. Felshtinsky, thank you so much for this conversation.
Thank you very much for your attention.
And to all our viewers, if this conversation was useful for you, please like and share, and see you.